Hi, I'm Chris Murray with Elevation Wheel. We're here with Molly Murrow of RockShox, and we want to show you how to get your bike ready for the Pikes Peak APEX.
We're going to dive into some topics like suspension setup and drivetrain cleaning, just to make sure that your bike is every bit as dialed as your mind and your body when you line up at that race start for the Pikes Peak APEX.
Get to it.
Some fun lines up here. Hard left.
So today I want to go over your race bike and just make sure that it is optimized for race performance. You're doing all this prep and training for this amazing race, and you want to make sure that the bike is the last of your worries. So we're going to start with an M check. The M check got its name because essentially we make that shape while we're inspecting the bike to make sure that we hit everything on it. So that M, we're going to start at the brake pads and we're going to do a brake pad inspection. So the first thing I'm going to do when inspecting the brake pads is pop them out. What I want to go ahead and do is remove the circlip from the brake pads and then remove the pads themselves from the caliper. I want to make sure that there's still plenty of life on those pads. I want to make sure that they're not contaminated, and I might even go ahead and clean them with some isopropyl alcohol. So I've got my brake pads out. I'm going to go ahead and inspect them and make sure that there's plenty of life left on those pads. I also want to visually inspect them and make sure that there's no visible contamination on there. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and spray some isopropyl alcohol on a brand new lint-free shop towel. And then I'm going to go ahead and just rub and drag the pad, eliminate any contamination that might be on there. The next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and inspect the pistons while my brake pads are out. You want to make sure that all of the pistons are not only moving freely, but that they're evenly spaced and pushed out so that you get even brake pad wear throughout the race. Nothing's more important than controlled braking, as that is your safety equipment when you're up in the mountains.
I'm going to go ahead and spray some isopropyl alcohol on another clean shop towel, and I'm going to apply it to my rotor and just get any of that contamination off from the pads that were previously contaminated, since I went so far as to clean those as well.
I'm going to go ahead and reinstall my brake pads into the caliper. I'm going to go ahead and thread that safety pin through, and then attach the circlip as well, making sure that my brake pads stay nice and securely in place during all of the rough chatter of the race. Moving up from the brakes, we want to go ahead and check your suspension settings. One, we want to make sure that the suspension isn't locked out, but we also want to make sure that it's nice and supportive for you during the race, right? We want to check not only our air volume, but we want to check your compression damping, and we want to check your rebound damping. We'll go through all of that in another video, so stick with us.
One way that you can definitely show your race bike some extra love is by checking the torque specifications from the manufacturer of all of your componentry and your bike frame. If you're riding a carbon frame or carbon bars, you always want to go to the lower of the two maximum torque ratings, and that's either found online or it can be printed on your components.
Now that I know that my cockpit is all cleaned up and torqued to spec, I'm going to go ahead and inspect my rear suspension. You want to do the same thing as you did with the front. Just make sure that your suspension is cycling nicely. You want to make sure it's not making any sounds or juicing or fluid coming out anytime that you cycle through the suspension. You want to make sure that it's nice and open and that the rebound is set fast enough to support you so that you're not sinking through your suspension throughout the race. Next, I'm going to go through and check all of the linkage and pivot bolts on my entire bike. I want to make sure that nothing's going to rattle loose on any of the fun descents. Now that I'm confident about all of my linkage bolts, I can go ahead and inspect the dropper seat post. If you have a cabled dropper seat post, go ahead and visually inspect the cable and make sure that there's no damage. You don't have to take the routing all the way out of the bike if it's internally routed, but it's still worthwhile just to check it when it's exposed and make sure that everything looks good. If you're running an electronic dropper, you want to make sure that you've done the regular service, 50 to 200 hours throughout the life of the post. Any of your local shops can perform this service for you. If you do notice any problems or even a sluggish return of your dropper seat post, it's definitely time for some service. So please take it to your local shop for some service well before the race. You don't want to leave that for last minute. We're the majority of the way through our pre-race bike check, but the one thing you never want to forget is a good old drivetrain check. You want nice, smooth, controlled shifting throughout the entirety of the race. And this is one of the best things that you can do ahead of time to make sure that every pedal stroke is a fast one. We want to go ahead and not only inspect the shifting, but we want to lube our drivetrain. We want to check all of the bolts. The last thing that you want is your derailleur rattling off as you're descending some of the most fun parts of the course. While inspecting your drivetrain, one really smart, often overlooked thing to do is go ahead and inspect that the crank arms are torqued to spec on your drivetrain. I'm running a SRAM Eagle transmission drivetrain, and the torque spec for my crank arms is 54 Newton meters. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust my torque wrench to 54, and then go ahead and lay the power down. While I've got my torque wrench out, I'm also going to go ahead and make sure that my derailleur hanger is torqued to spec as well. On the Transmission Eagle drivetrain, it's 25 Newton meters directly into the rear triangle of the frame. One thing to note is you should always, always, always carry a spare derailleur hanger with you. You never know what's going to happen on course. Unless, of course, you're not running a derailleur hanger. After inspecting your drivetrain, go ahead and do the same check that we did with the front brake on the rear as well. And that's almost the finish of our M check. One last crucial piece that you want to make sure that you hit is your wheels. You want to do a quick rim inspection. You want to go ahead and check spoke tension, make sure that there's no loose spokes, and that your rotor is spinning freely and not causing the wheels to stop prematurely on each rotation. And that's it, folks. How easy was that? A standard M check on your race bike, and now you're race ready. Make sure if there are any of those services that we talked about that you need to get done before the race, that you do that ASAP and give your local mechanic as much time as possible to make sure your bike receives the attention it needs. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to racing with you.